Okay, so today we're going to go a long way towards wrapping up our study of the Old Testament. I'm going to cover the book of Malachi today, as well as, at least my plan is to do this, to cover the book of Malachi today, as well as the second half, last 4 chapters of the book of Ezra. There, that's better. Ezra, so what we have left to do, except for the Psalms, which I'm going to do last, I'll do those at some later point in time. All we have left to cover in the Old Testament, as we've been going through it now for 2 years, is the last part of Ezra, the part that Ezra himself actually appears in, the Nehemiah, which overlaps with Ezra, and then Malachi. That's it. Today I plan on getting 2 of those 3 done, if possible. I'm going to start with the book of Malachi. So we just covered the book of Esther, which took place in Persia and dealt with the Jews who were living in the Persian Empire and outside the Holy Land of Judea near Jerusalem. Now that was in the 470s or so BC. Now we're going to turn our attention back to Jerusalem and focus on what's going on here in Jerusalem, in and around the temple area. Ezra and Nehemiah were contemporaries. They knew each other. Well, I guess they knew each other. They do appear together in a couple of spots in Nehemiah. Ezra got to Jerusalem first, and Nehemiah came a few years later, and there was some overlap in their ministries. And that was in the mid 400s BC. And during the same time, there was a prophet that we call Malachi, who was also ministering and speaking to the people, but it's hard to say exactly how Malachi fits into the timeline. Neither Ezra nor Nehemiah mentions a guy named Malachi, or the presence of a prophet in general amongst the people at that time. Malachi does not appear. Nehemiah, not Ezra. Ezra and Nehemiah will both go to Jerusalem with the blessing and permission and invested with the authority of the king of Persia. Ezra and Nehemiah both lived and worked under the reign of a guy named Artaxerxes, the son of the guy in the book of Esther, whose name was, his great name at least, was Xerxes. This is his son now, Artaxerxes. And Ezra and Nehemiah, we don't know much about Ezra because we start that book with him already kind of on his way. But we do know that Nehemiah knew Artaxerxes personally, and Ezra must have too somehow, because Ezra and Nehemiah both have letters from the king granting them significant levels of authority and permission. In fact, Nehemiah becomes the governor. He gets sent to the city and the temple area and in Judea to be the governor of that region, or at least of the Jews in that region. I don't think Ezra was a governor, but Ezra was clearly meant to be a religious leader, a very high-profile, authoritative religious leader, and both of them got this authority invested in them by the king of Persia, the same king Artaxerxes. We don't know, however, how exactly Malachi the prophet fits into all this. It appears as though Malachi spoke during a time when Nehemiah was not the governor. Malachi, is going to refer sarcastically to the governor. So it probably wasn't Nehemiah or Ezra. I don't think Ezra ever was governor, or really any Jew. It was probably a Persian governor. Whatever governor he's talking about at that time was probably not one of their own. And Nehemiah was, so I don't think it happened I don't think Malachi's message occurred during Nehemiah's governorship. So it either happened, now again, remember, we're reading this stuff down after it was originally spoken. So when Malachi spoke versus when he wrote, or his message was written, could be different, okay? He may have spoken his message at a point in time and then written it down decades later, or someone else wrote it down decades later. That's very possible. In fact, it's likely. I mean, it's like they were spoken first and then written to be later on. And so it's really hard to say exactly what Malachi is going to talk about the same things that Ezra and Nehemiah talk about. Okay, they're all kind of concerning the same broad problem. So Malachi fits in there somewhere. He probably was not ministering, at least not as a spoken prophet, during Nehemiah's governorship. So either he conducted his ministry before Nehemiah got there, and probably before Ezra did too. Ezra got there first. Ezra got there in 458 BC. Nehemiah came along in 444 BC. So either Malachi spoke to the people before Nehemiah came, and probably even before Ezra came, and then Nehemiah is actually going to leave and come back. There's going to be a period of time when Nehemiah is in the city for a long time, 12 years. Then he goes back to Artaxerxes in Persia. Then sometime later, he comes back to Jerusalem again. So it's possible that Malachi is coming in during that time when Nehemiah is gone. Possible. I don't know. I tend to think, my gut feeling is that Malachi probably spoke his message before either Ezra or Nehemiah got there. Because it seems a little hard for me to believe, even as prone to disobedience as these people were, it seems a bit hard for me to believe that they would have immediately gone back to if Nehemiah comes and does his governorship from 444 to 432 BC, and cleans up the system, or if he enacts all these reforms with Ezra's help, because Ezra's there too at that time, and then he leaves and goes back to Persia for a few years, and then comes back again and sees the same problems. It's hard for me to believe that in that narrow window of time of just a few years, they could have immediately and so quickly and thoroughly gone back to doing what he had stopped them from doing a few years earlier. That just, even for these people, that seems like an awfully quick turnaround into backsliding. So my personal suspicion is that Malachi's ministry, at least as a speaking prophet, I have a cat here, probably occurred before Ezra came, or overlap maybe with Ezra, and before Nehemiah came. We don't even really know for certain. We know nothing about Malachi, but we don't even really know for certain that Malachi was his name, because Malachi means messenger, and it could just as easily be he could be identifying himself as God's messenger, not necessarily even identifying himself by his name. I've got Ezra, Malachi, and Nehemiah to get through, and then the Psalms, and we'll see what we do with the New Testament later. If I could just do that before these cats destroy. This cat has wanted to destroy this camera ever since I got it. And if I can just get through the next couple of days worth of videos, I'll be able to escape without this cat. Oh, she's getting into the evil eye there. Oh no, here we go. How about you go sit over here, cat? Oh no. I don't like any of this. I just don't like any of this. Okay. Anyway, so that is, and even if I'm wrong in that, and I have no way really of knowing. We don't really know how Malachi's ministry overlaps with Ezra and Nehemiah's. I'm going to go ahead and read it first, because I want to set the context for what's going on in the land at this time. Because Ezra, Nehemiah, and Malachi are all dealing with the same basic problem of spiritual malaise. This is now 460 or so BC. Okay, let's review the timeline here. They went into Babylonian captivity in 586 BC. Actually, they were started going to Babylonian captivity before that. They were in Babylonian captivity for 50 to 70 years, depending on how you want to look at it. Then the Persians come and conquer Babylon in 539 BC, and in the first year of that or so, Cyrus, the king of Persia, issues a decree allowing the captive people he inherited from Babylon, including the Jews, to go back to their native homelands, rebuild their temples, and reinstitute their way of living. They're not given permission to be independent sovereign states. They have a Persian governor. They pay taxes to the Persian king. But they do have basically permission to conduct themselves as they see fit in most other ways. So they go back to the land. This is in the early 530s BC. They start rebuilding the temple. They build the altar. They dig out a trench for their foundation, and they get stopped for a variety of reasons. We read about this in the first part of Ezra, and then Haggai and Zechariah. Then after a number of years, Haggai and Zechariah come along and spur the people back into finishing that temple. Don't let it just sit there and go to waste. Finish it. And they do. That was in 520 BC. And they finish it, they dedicate it, and that's about 515 BC. Okay, this is now, and then we had the events in Esther that took place in the Persian Empire in the 470s BC. And this is now sometime after 460 BC, probably. So 50 or 60 years, at least, and that's assuming this is early, but, I'm assuming, like I said, Malachi could have come in at a couple different points in time, but we're at least 50 or 60 years away from the temple having been finished. Okay, so this is now a couple generations even beyond that. We're going to get, at some point in Ezra, not Malachi, but when we get back to the historical books, we're going to get the genealogy of Zerubbabel. Remember Zerubbabel? He was the governor that came to the land. Actually, there was another one even before him, Sheshbazzar. Then Zerubbabel was the guy who oversaw the building of the temple. And that was in the 520, 515 BC time frame. And now we're going to be going down to like his great-great-great-grandson. Okay, so this is 4 or 5 generations even beyond the finishing of the temple, 60 or so years ago. So it's been a while. And basically what is happening is the people are just getting tired. They've gone back to the land. Okay, so there was this great and glorious expectation that when they got back to the land, everything was going to be great, everything was going to be swell, God was going to come. We read about some of the disillusionment with that already in Haggai and Zechariah, and now that we're even 60 years beyond that, the temple is functioning, it's up and it's functioning, but God still hasn't come. The anointed one of the Lord still has not appeared. God has still not come back to kick the Persians' butts and make Judah the great kingdom again. That hasn't happened. And the people are just getting tired. And they're getting tired, they're getting frustrated, they're doubting God. I don't think that they're necessarily turning to idolatry in the way they used to. I don't think they're necessarily putting idols in their houses and bowing down to them the way they used to, but they're just getting very cold towards God. They've been waiting a long time. It's been 1,000 years since Moses led the people out of Egypt and God gave Moses the law to give to the people. That was in 1446 BC. Okay, this is now 1,000 years after that. And they've been waiting, and then David himself, King David, was 600 years ago now practically. They've been waiting and they've been told all that time that a guy like David was going to come and be their king and then lead them to this great glorious kingdom again. And they've been told this for a long time. And it hasn't happened. And they're just getting tired. Basically, that's what's going on here. You have a people who are losing their patience with God. They're getting tired, they're getting indifferent, they're getting cold. I have cats everywhere. And they're cutting corners. They're not being sincere. They don't have passion anymore. They don't feel the love of God, either the love that He has for them, and certainly not returning it for their love for Him. It's just why do you guys have to bother me? Just go over there. Just sit. There's a chair right there for you to sit on. I fed you like 5 times today, cat. Go away. Just stop bothering me. It was constant bothering. And they're just getting tired. And it's manifesting itself in all of these corners they're cutting and all of these shortcuts they're taking and just their coldness and indifference towards God and towards each other. Okay, when the people get cold and indifferent towards God, they're going to get cold and indifferent towards each other. And that's just going to happen. And so that is what all 3 of the remaining sections of the Old Testament we're going to be reading here are going to talk about. Basically, that is the underlying condition that's going on throughout this period of time. Okay, so we're going to start with Malachi, because I think by reading, Malachi may have come first. I think there's a pretty good chance Malachi's ministry as a speaking prophet occurred before Ezra came back, and then Nehemiah. I don't know. I think there's a pretty good chance of that. But even if he didn't, we're going to read it now, because that will help set the context and set the stage for what we read about in the rest of Ezra and in Nehemiah, and get us in the mindset of the people living at that time, and help us like do a deep dive into what their thinking was and what their lives were like and how things were going in the land at that time. An oracle. The word of the Lord to Israel through Malachi. And there's a footnote down here saying Malachi means my messenger. Messengers are a common theme in the book of Malachi. All right, Malachi himself is a messenger. It might, again, that may or may not be a name or a title, but he's going to be referring to the priests as messengers, or at least they're supposed to be messengers. He's going to be referring to the messenger of the covenant, which is Jesus Christ, that's going to come along in chapters 3 and 4. He's only going to be talking about the messenger who's going to come before that guy in 3 and 4, which is going to be Elijah. We find out about that in the New Testament. So the idea of messengers is it's a prominent theme in the book of Malachi, which is one reason why I wonder if Malachi was not actually a name, but more like a title. Because the theme of messengers is so prominent, it could be that this guy identified himself as God's messenger, or God identified him as his messenger, even if that hadn't been his name. And I don't know, maybe it was his name, but he doesn't identify himself through any other distinguishing characteristic. Doesn't tell us who his father was or what his hometown was. I believe the only other prophet who gives us this little information about himself is Obadiah, in the book of Obadiah. So anyway. Oh, by the way, as we read, Malachi is a short book. If we were just to simply read it from chapter 1 to 4 or 6, we get it done in 10 minutes, tops. We're not going to do that, though, okay? Malachi is chock full of specific, it looks both backwards and forwards, okay? Now, in our Bibles, in our copies, it's the last book of the Old Testament. You turn the page, one page past Malachi, and then you get to the New Testament, and the page after that is Matthew. Okay, that's not necessarily the way it's always arranged, but in our Bibles it's arranged last. And it is a good ending point of the Old Testament because it looks both backwards and forwards. And so we're going to be reading a lot of other passages that are you're going to cross-reference a lot of other passages as you read the Malachi, because he's going to be talking about specific things that people are doing that break specific laws that God gave them, and telling them to stop doing that and get back to the law. And that goes back to what the prophets in general have done. Okay, I've been saying all along, these prophets didn't speak in a vacuum, and they didn't speak in generalities or abstractions. Now they would sometimes boil down their message to, like Micah 6:8, love, justice, let's see, how does Micah say that? Do mercy, love justly, act humbly. Okay, they do sometimes break their message down to these simple overall, Micah 6, what does the Lord require of you? To act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. Okay. But they did get a lot of specific laws in the law of Moses that they're supposed to follow and keep, and commands. And so the prophets did often call out specific things people were doing that broke specific laws that God had given them. And Malachi does that a number of times. He was probably a priest. Whoever this Malachi dude was, he was probably a priest, because he shows a great level of knowledge of the law and a great level of awareness of it and a great concern for the priesthood and the priests' reputations and their purity. So he probably was a priest. A lot of the prophets were priests, not all of them, but a lot of them were. And so it stands to reason that he probably was a priest, because many of the prophets were also priests. But we're going to be looking back to a lot of Old Testament passages that will go along with what Malachi is saying. And he himself ends his book by saying, "Remember the law." I mean, near the very end of the book, he says, "Remember the law of my servant Moses." So we're going to do that here. Like, we're going to take the time to look up a lot of these specific things that Moses had said that go along with Malachi's warning to the people to remember the law. And we're also going to be looking to the future, and Malachi does that too, because we're going to be looking to the coming of the messenger, and the messenger before the messenger even. So we're going to be looking into that as well. So we're not going to be able to get through this as quickly as you might think just by looking at it for its short length. It's only, in our Bibles, it's like a page and a half long. It's only 4 chapters, and only, I didn't count up how many verses there are, maybe 40 or 50, 55, I think, 55 verses. So if we just read it through from start to finish, we get it done probably by the time I just got done talking, actually. In this 5 minutes so far. But we're not going to do that. Oh, one more thing before I get started. Malachi, this is another example. You have to remember, I always say this, I go back to this over and over and over again. The chapters and verses that we have in our Bibles, and even in these headings and stuff that you see there, the section breaks and things, those are all put into the text by translators and formatters at a later point in time. That was not how the text was originally formatted. So Malachi, when he wrote this, and when the Jews read this and consumed it for hundreds of years, and even when the Christians got it later on, like nobody had chapters and verses in mind here. And that, for the most part, it doesn't make that much of a difference. I mean, for the most part, when you read the Bible, the chapters and verses are useful. They're certainly useful to help, like, reference, spots of Scripture. But they're not part of the original text. They're not inspired. They're not part either the Holy Spirit inspired or the original human author. Okay, it was not the intent of either the Holy Spirit or the original human author to have these chapters and verses here. And the chapters and verses don't always break the text. I know she's going to do something here now. That's why I'm distracted. The chapters and verses don't always break the text up like it should. And for the most part, this is not a big problem throughout the Bible, but it is here in Malachi. There are a few instances where the chapters and verses can actually hinder our understanding. She is going to do something. Like I want her to just get settled down for a nap. Okay, well, there she goes, I guess. But anyway, there are a few places where the chapter and verse divisions do hinder our understanding of the Scriptures, because they make us think that there are chunks of thought where there are not, or something like that. And Malachi is one of those. The chapters and verses in Malachi, the chapter breaks are not in good places, so we're just going to kind of ignore that. Because Malachi is broken up into a series of arguments that God is having with the people. If you're going to break Malachi up into chapters, they should have done it according to those arguments, so they don't. They just kind of do it randomly, from what I can tell. There are 6 or 7 different arguments that the people are going to, or God's going to have with the people. God is going to be initiating these arguments, and the people are going to give a response, or at least Malachi is going to speak a response for the people. He's going to say, here's what basically what's going to happen is God is going to say something. He's going to give them a charge. He's going to accuse them of something. And then the people are going to say, what are you talking about, God? We don't do that. What are you talking about here? And then Malachi is going to go into detail, or God through Malachi is going to go into detail about what he means and how he's going to prove this charge, and then give them a command about what to do, how to live their lives in light of that. That's how Malachi is structured. Okay, and so the chapter breaks should have been broken up according to those arguments, but they're not. So we're going to kind of just ignore the chapter breaks entirely in Malachi, because they actually hinder our understanding of some of these. Because some of these chapter breaks occur in the middle of an argument, like they occur in the middle of a section, and so we think of a section break there when we see that, but we really shouldn't be. Okay, so alright, so hopefully she's settling down for a nap at least. An oracle. The word of the Lord to Israel. You know what? I'm going to start a new video. I think I will note to self when I edit these someday in the future, take this video and attach it to the end of the last one, because this is still basically part of my intro.